The Russians have not demonstrated the tremendous capabilities. They are deficient in their military operations. Their troops are demoralized. They don't have a lot of the high quality military equipment they need in order to make a breakthrough. So I think people have expected more from the Russians this time around. So far, we haven't seen it.
The US military has said a Russian fighter jet collided with an American drone and caused the unmanned aircraft to crash into the Black Sea. The US European Command confirmed that the drone fell into the Black Sea west of Crimea, close to the conflict zone in Ukraine, after what it described as an unsafe and unprofessional intercept. A State Department spokesperson said the US has summoned Russia's ambassador to Washington to convey America's strong objections to what's happened. The Pentagon Press Secretary, Air Force Brigadier General Pat Ryder, told reporters during a press briefing that the Russian pilots had acted recklessly.
Two Russian Su-27 aircraft conducted unsafe and unprofessional intercept with a U.S. Air Force intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance unmanned MQ-9 aircraft that was operating within international airspace over the Black Sea today. To recap, at approximately 7:03 a.m. Central European Time, one of the Russian Su-27 aircraft struck the propeller of the MQ-9, causing U.S. forces to have to bring the MQ-9 down in international waters. Several times before the collision, the Su-27s dumped fuel on and flew in front of the MQ-9 in a reckless and unprofessional manner.
Well, Thomas Graham's a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also a former special assistant to President George W. Bush and a senior director for Russia on the National Security Council, and joins us now. Good evening to you, Thomas.
Good evening.
Just talk us through your understanding of what happened here.
Well, I think, the first thing to be mentioned is that Russia routinely intercepts U.S. reconnaissance flights along its borders, not only in the Black Sea, but all around the periphery of Russia, just the way America intercepts Russian reconnaissance flights around our territorial waters in continental United States. And over the years, we've tried to develop rules of conduct so that we conduct these intercepts safely and in a professional fashion. What has happened over the Black Sea is a very unprofessional Russian intercept of a drone, and we've been concerned by the way Russia has intercepted many of our aircraft in the past. So this is one. It's not unusual that Russia has occupied or acted in an unprofessional fashion. This has led to a downing of an aircraft, and that, of course, raises the concern about what the Russians are up to.
The US military are saying this drone was on a routine mission, but many people might be perhaps quite surprised to know that US drones are routinely patrolling around the Black Sea, very close indeed to the conflict zone. I mean, is this routine behavior?
Yeah, it's routine behavior. We're collecting intelligence, just the way the Russians would do this if the situation were reversed. So, clearly we have probably stepped up our reconnaissance flights in the Black Sea since the beginning of the conflict over a year ago. But this is not out of the ordinary. This is something the Russians should expect.
And does the US have a right to be patrolling in these areas?
Well, it's international airspace, so we have a right to be there. Countries collect intelligence against other countries, so this is not unexpected. This is routine behavior by a major power dealing with an adversary.
Do you think the Russians intended to do this, or was this perhaps something where it was essentially an unprofessional maneuver, as you say? They didn't mean to bring it down, but that's what happened. Do you think it was an accident?
Well, we don't know. We don't know what the intention was on the part of the Russian military at this point. But this is why we're concerned about these things. When you intercept in an unprofessional, unsafe fashion, you raise the risk of an accident, and that is particularly problematic at a time now of increasing tension between Russia and the United States in what is a war zone. And so we would prefer that the Russians do these things in a professional fashion. That is one of the reasons we brought their ambassador in, and I'm sure we denounced this in a very harsh fashion.
Yeah, what will have been said to the Russian ambassador, do you think?
Well, I think one, that this was unprofessional. It would have underscored the point that we have heightened tensions in the relationship. That accidents like this raise the possibility of undesired escalation, and clearly the United States has no interest in engaging in a direct military confrontation with Russia at this point. That has been the position of the president since the very beginning of this conflict. Uh, Acts like this have a risk of spiraling out of control. So we want to avoid that. I'm sure we said that in very forceful terms to the Russian ambassador.
Yeah, a Russian statement has said there was no physical contact between its jets and the drone, and that the planes did not use any of the onboard weapons and returned safely to their home airfield. What do you think this will mean for relations, which, of course, are already pretty hostile between the US and Russia?
Well, they're not going to get any better. The one thing to uh, underscore, however, this was an unmanned aircraft, so there's no loss of life. If this had been a manned aircraft, loss of life, then we're in an entirely different situation. So clearly, by giving a stern caution to the Russians at this point, we want to make sure that they don't engage in this type of unprofessional intercept of a manned U.S. aircraft.
And will there now be attempts by the US to recover the wreckage of this drone?
Well, my understanding is that we have recovered the wreckage of the drone. This has a fairly highly sensitive equipment on board. It's not something that we would want to fall into the hands of the Russians. So we will make every effort to retrieve the drone.
This happens, of course, at a time when the war in Ukraine continues. We saw a few days ago another series of strikes on, in particular, energy installations on a number of Ukrainian cities. But it does appear that beyond that, there is effectively just this horrendous grinding battle along the east of Ukraine, that battle for places like Bakhmut, which seems to be leading to a tremendous loss of life. What's your assessment of where the conflict has reached?
Well, we have a war of attrition at this point. The Russians have launched an offensive. The hope is to make some real progress on the ground and push back against Ukraine, maybe a breakthrough of some sort that would change the dynamic of this conflict. Everything that we've seen so far suggests that the Russians haven't done that they're incapable of doing that at this point, and they are taking tremendous casualties for very little progress on the ground. Now, we're also anticipating an offensive by the Ukrainians in the next several weeks or months with the same goal in mind, to shift that line of contact, to push the Russians back. How successful they will be, and that depends on the type of military support and equipment they get from the West, the morale of their troops, and the timing and the operational efficiency. So we are in a very grinding battle at this point, but the next several months will give us some indication of whether this is going to move towards the favor of the Ukrainians or the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, there had been a lot of expectations just a few weeks ago of a renewed offensive by the Russians, perhaps to coincide with the 1 year anniversary of their latest invasion. Um, but there doesn't seem to have been any particular renewed move. It is just this horrendous grinding battle around Bakhmut that seems to be absorbing so much of the resources of both sides.
Well, this is true, although I think, we focus almost exclusively on this battle around Bakhmut, but there is, in fact, conflict taking place all along the line of contact, north and south of Bakhmut as well. So um, there's more going on than I think is reflected in much of the media reporting here in the West. And this is part of a broader offensive. That said, the Russians have not demonstrated the tremendous capabilities They are deficient in their military operations. Their troops are demoralized. They don't have a lot of the high quality military equipment they need in order to make a breakthrough. So I think people have expected more from the Russians this time around. So far, we haven't seen it.
Just finally, let me ask you about the situation in the United States. Donald Trump, who, as I'm sure you're aware, has already indicated that he wants to run for the White House again, has said that he could bring this war to an end. He described the war as a tragedy and promised to end the conflict in less than 24 hours if he's elected.
Right.
Are you concerned that the war in Ukraine, which over the last year, there has been pretty much cross-party support for the huge amounts of aid, ammunition, and so on, which the United States has been providing to the Ukrainians, that could become a political football as we approach the next US presidential election?
Well, it will become an issue in the next U.S. presidential election, and we'll need to watch the way the Republican candidates position themselves, because that will give us some sense of what they think the mood in the country is. What you've said is true. There has been strong bipartisan support for Ukraine. There's been strong popular support Ukraine up to this point. But I think what President or former President Trump has said, and what some other commentators have more recently, indicates that it's incumbent upon the current administration to make a much more powerful case than they have up to this point as to why continuing to support Ukraine is in American interest. I think the administration has failed in that regard, and one would hope in coming weeks and months that they would make a more concerted effort to explain to the American people what's at stake and why it's important that the United States continue to support Ukraine at this point.
Thomas Graham, a Distinguished Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're certainly welcome.